Welcome to our weekly On Politics show. I'm Greg Borowski, your host, and we have plenty of topics we're going to cover today. A lot of news breaking, and we're going to get to much of it. We're going to start today with a look at the arena issue, sort of bucks for the bucks, and where things stand in terms of when we're going to get this done and who's paying, and we'll even touch on the logo and the arena designs. Next, we'll talk about a violent spring in Milwaukee, including the spate of shootings in the past week. We'll have the latest Marquette poll results on the governor's approval ratings and how he fares against Hillary Clinton. And finally, we'll go to reader questions. We've got some already submitted. We'll try to get to a few of those, and there are others that we'll take that come in during the show. So right now, we'll introduce our guests. Here we have Don Walker, as a longtime reporter in Milwaukee for the Journal Sentinel, now on a fellowship where he's helping us cover the arena issue. Mary Louise Schumacher, who is our art and architecture critic, who has a few things to say about the design of that new proposed building. But let's start with Don. Where are we? This was supposed to be crunch time. Shouldn't there already be a shovel in the ground and girders rising down the street?
The Bucks certainly would have liked to have put a shovel in the ground this spring, but that's not going to happen. Their new goal, of course, is the fall. What's happening right now is the exciting topic of meetings. The Bucks are meeting with City Hall. The Bucks are meeting with the county board and county executive Chris Abele. And of course, they're meeting with top legislative leaders in Madison. Private meetings, they're supposed to have a very big powwow next week to sort of figure out how this arena financing plan will come together, but it's very much in pieces right now. It's very fluid, as the politicians like to say. There are a lot of questions to be answered. But last week, obviously, we got a little bit of a peek of the arena design, which I think was important to show the public that there was some measure of progress here. But right now, things are a little bit behind the scenes and up in the air, I would say.
Well, isn't the big problem so we're still short? I mean, so you've got Herb Kohl's going to give $100 million. The owner's 150. The latest state plan is 150 million, and Tom Barrett's plan is roughly 25 million.
Right.
So there's a gap there. Who fills the gap, and how quickly does it get filled?
Well, if you ask the Republicans in Madison, they point their finger at both the county and the city. And while the county, Chris Abele, has been somewhat quiet about what his plans are, he seems to be working on something in his laboratory. The mayor has made it clear from the get-go he did put out a detailed plan of aid in roughly $25.4 million. The Republican leadership says that's not enough. So that's very much up in the air about how do we fill that funding gap. Now, there have been some rumbles. Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald had been talking about this $150 million plan coming out of the legislature. Now there's some talk that that might go up just a little bit, maybe 175. That helps the cause, of course, but there will be funding gaps, and that's really the purpose of some of these meetings, to figure out who can reasonably put in money in the pot to get this financing plan in front of the Joint Finance Committee.
Okay, and what's the timetable on that? Do you think we'll get there this month, or is there more sort of this maneuvering and
there will be quite a bit of maneuvering going on over the next few weeks. Senator Fitzgerald said that he hoped to have the budget wrapped up by Memorial Day, which I think is pretty ambitious. But in general, they want to have an arena financing plan in front of the Joint Finance Committee probably mid to late May for consideration. And of course, who knows what the Joint Finance Committee does with that plan, but that is the goal.
Okay. We want to talk too. Don mentioned the new arena design. We've seen the first few images of what it could be. We've had it likened to the reverse Nike swoosh. We've had it likened to the In-N-Out burger kind of thing, the Jetsony kind of feel.
Yeah.
Is the design a winner, a loser, somewhere in between? Mary Louise.
Well, and everything that Don is describing is actually context for the release of this design, and we should note that it's really preliminary, and architects almost never kind of put these designs out before they're really finished. It would be like us, putting out a story that's in draft form, but they're doing that because they want the optics to kind of make the political case for the financing. The good thing about that is it's a rare opportunity for us to sort of get a look at what their design idea is. So there's a lot of open questions. So, for example, the renderings only really show us one side of the design. We actually have no idea what this building will look like from the other sides. So it leaves a lot of questions open. But my initial reaction was, I saw the rendering that was initially released with Dawn's first story, and it was just that aerial view, and you could kind of see this gentle swell of the roof, and it was, kind of interesting and unremarkable, really. But then the next day, we were at this press conference, and they released the second and third rendering, and it had this really strong kind of atomic age boomerangy feel to it, and it was just, to me, like kind of a shock. And I thought, it's interesting because they've made it their own. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's not like too slavishly retro. It's kind of a retro futuristic nod, but they don't kind of overdo it. They've made it their own. It's really super simple, and I think that's interesting. But
So
I will say,
is retro futuristic the new jumbo shrimp in terms of you're going back and forth?
yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it recalls, a past where there's nostalgia and optimism for a future that kind of didn't arrive, and it recalls a period in Milwaukee's history that is really interesting and that's important to our present too. So, but we have no idea like how that form is going to read, for example, from Juneau, which is like this really, looks like it could be this monolithic, cold, solid wall. So there's a lot of open questions, and hopefully they'll refine it over time.
Yeah, so Don, I want to get your take on that too, but also to note the fact that there's all this plan around it, but that's not really real yet, right? There's no specific plan, it's just an image at this stage.
It's not real, and I would point out off of Mary Louise's comments is what should not be discounted is this plan for this public plaza that would be in front of the arena. Wes Eden's one of the Bucks owners, making it clear this is, of course, heaven to hear for Wisconsin fans, the largest sports bar in the country. If he pulls that off, he will draw many people, but they would like to create this very public plaza near the arena. This is being done around the country. As far as the other so-called ancillary development, you're absolutely right. There really isn't anything concrete right now. I think really the first foothold of that ancillary development will come from the Bucks themselves. They want to build a practice facility really within shouting distance of the new arena site. One would presume it would be forward-looking, very much in the style of what they're thinking for the arena. That creates a little bit of buzz, I think. Secondly, I think the city is about ready to assist the Bucks in pulling in some developers, talking to them about what can be done here.
All right, we're going to move on in just a second. I want to very briefly show us the new logo and just get a quick thumbs up or down from you guys.
Okay.
Good, bad. We've moved from an 8-point buck to a 12-point buck. If they win the championship, it'll probably be a 24-point buck. But what are we?
I'm going to say I actually really like it a lot. It's kind of flat. It's also retro, so kind of like the building. It has that kind of retro feel. It feels almost like a logo that was made by hand in the time before we use computers for these things. So it's charming. It's subdued, and when you think about like the noise and the color and the kind of raucous nature of the NBA, this sort of is kind of a bold move. I like it.
Cream. Trivia note here that cream is, the Bucks are using cream in that logo. No other team in the NBA uses that color. I would point out, one of the tertiary logos that they put together was a map of Wisconsin with a basketball in the southeastern part of the state. Not the greatest logo in the world, but an unmistakable message being sent. We want to be a statewide team, just like the Brewers, just like the Packers. That is going to be a talking point, really, for legislatures in Madison.
Right. We're going to move on to our next segment and shift gears to what may, unfortunately, sound like the broken record department a little bit. We've had another violent week in the city. Homicides have now reached 43 compared to 14 at this time last week. There was this incident that drew national attention this week of the accident where a 2-year-old runs into the street, is hit and killed. The driver gets out and he's shot and killed. The brother of the 2-year-old is killed, and now we find out within the hour that the shooter the police were after has apparently killed himself in Chicago. So we're going to start by running a little bit of video from Chief Edward Flynn, which came in the days after the shooting, so before the news today on the guy they were looking for.
You know, last year, 3 of the lowest years we've had in the last 20 for homicides have been during my administration. And you are right, we are on pace to be the highest, not only in my 7 or 8 years of being police chief here, but the highest in a number of years, and that is disturbing. And we're analyzing them. What do we have? What did we have last night? 2 groups of girls get in a fight, call their boyfriends. Boyfriends come with guns, light up the street corner, and kill an innocent girl who had nothing to do with this asinine dispute. All right? That's the kind of homicide we're dealing with. What did we have Sunday? All right? We had some clown take the law into his own hands and murder a guy who was doing what we expect good citizens to do. And, oops, accidentally, kill somebody else. Now, we're after that guy. We know who he is. If we need to share information, we will. We're going to clear up that homicide. But we have time after time after time, the leading cause of homicidal violence with guns in this city is arguments and fights. We say it over and over again because you have to say it over and over again for people to understand. Over 80% of my offenders and victims have criminal records. This is still a narrow slice of the population that's putting the entire community at risk. And if we can't figure out a way to felonize it when we catch them before they shoot somebody, we're not going to stop the violence.
So that was Chief Flynn earlier this week, and we're joined now by James Causey, who's an editorial page columnist for the Journal Sentinel and has wrote about this case and many others. And Don, I should note, is a former City Hall reporter, so he's well aware of sort of the dynamics behind policing and all these issues that go on in the city. Everything seems ever more outrageous. I mean, this is just a crazy incident, and it just crystallizes people's worries and fears, I think, about the city. James, what's your take on what's going on out there, and why can't we seem to get this under control?
Well, I think what's going on is that we have a number of issues all taking place at one time. I mean, everyone's looking for the silver bullet to stop this. I hate using bullet in this case, but it's appropriate. Everybody wants to say, is it drugs, is it gangs, is it guns? Well, it's everything. And you could add 20 more things on top of that. It's poverty, it's hopelessness, it's joblessness. It's a number of things that are causing all these shootings. And a lot of it falls back on the parents as well. I think in order to get a foothold on this, we need to have more communication. And we have to have more, people need to work more with police. And I think everyone knows someone who has a legal gun. And if you know someone with a legal gun, it's up to you to try to make sure that those guns don't end up killing someone. If you can't do it, you need to contact the police and have them do it. But it's tragic because of a number of different reasons. We're losing kids now. And when you start losing kids, you have to think about this. If a city's health is based on the safety and well-being of their children, then we're failing. I mean, kids are being killed. And I think a lot of people are not really focusing so much on that.
Well, I think this one might have struck people in a way because they might hear about 2 gang members who are in an incident and they figure, well, I'm not a gang member, it couldn't affect me. But I think a lot of people could identify with someone who's going down the street about their business and this tragedy happens and look at the aftermath. Don, how are the chief and the mayor, and I mean everything eventually gets into the political realm, how are they handling this and presenting their case for more gun laws or stricter gun laws?
Well, it's no secret, for example, that the mayor and some of his top staff are always notified immediately of a homicide in the city, so it becomes very personal for them. I know they feel somewhat helpless over this last week where there's just been this enormous amount of violence. But at the same time, both City Hall and the aldermen are very mindful of the great amount of money that is already spent on public safety in this city. And as James points out, it's not just about putting more cops on the streets. There are other avenues that need to be explored. The police costs are something north of 40% of the entire city budget, so no one can necessarily accuse the city of underspending. Certainly Mike Crivello, the head of the police union, has been vocal in the last few days saying, stop the furlough of cops, we got to hire back unfilled positions.
None of this will be solved. And I think what we have now is that more people are out, the weather is changing. We haven't even reached summer yet. If we're at 43 now, just wait until the summer. We have to start tackling these really hard to deal with issues, and we keep skirting around the issues.
Mountain, so
right.
Let's get started. How do we get things going in the right direction?
I think we really have to focus on grassroots level approaches to dealing with a lot of these urban issues. And there's a lot of great programs out there that I write about constantly that are really making a difference in kids' life. Like, for instance, this one program, Saving Our Sons, they're doing tremendous things because they're getting young people to put down guns and talk about all the trauma that they've dealt with in their lives. And this is getting changes at the root causes. It takes a long time to get to, this paradise, this utopia. But until we start doing that, then we can't tackle any of these other issues. We have to start talking about trauma that exists in our community.
Don, can you talk a little about the clash? Every time something like this happens, it seems that Chief Flynn is on one side, Sheriff Clark is on the other side, and there's this head-butting and even posturing and maneuvering for their own points of view. But does anyone win in that? I mean, whose view is sort of carrying the day? What do you make of all that?
Well, certainly it's done for public consumption. Television stations are quick to show up for these events, whether it's Sheriff Clark saying something or the chief. But let's not forget also we have 2 aldermen who are going to be running against Mayor Barrett next year. They too are part of
ASOnline.com/precious-lives. Now, we've gone about 20 minutes in our show without mentioning presidential politics, which may be a record for us. We're going to shift there now. We're going to start with some new poll numbers that came out literally about 30 minutes ago. So we're going to show some of those on this screen. This is the first Marquette poll from 2015, and the first numbers we're looking at are how would you rate Governor Walker's job performance. The approval side was 41% and 56% disapprove. Important note, the last time this was polled, late last year, it was 49% favorable, 47% unfavorable, so that's a significant drop for the governor. And we also are going to look at the matchups, the hypothetical matchup in Wisconsin if you had to choose between Hillary Clinton or Scott Walker. Hillary Clinton came in at 52%, Governor Walker at 40%, and that's more or less where it was the last time they polled, which was 53-41. So we're going to come back now and go through those numbers and sort of how Walker's faring on the presidential trail. And we're joined by Daniel Bice, our Watchdog columnist, and he's been looking at these numbers a little bit and will get us going.
I'm our resident Walker expert.
Our resident Walker expert. Go ahead.
The poll overall, the bottom line is, this is an alarm bell for Governor Walker. There are 3 things that jump out. One, that voters don't like a number of his policies. They don't like his school cuts. They don't like his UW cuts. Right. The only thing that they like is his plan to borrow money for roads. 2, they're not particularly enthralled with his presidential campaign. He's still 12 points behind Hillary Clinton. She's gotten some attention and bump because she's gotten involved in the race, but still, you would think in his home state he would be doing better than this. And then 3, the voters are underwhelmed with his performance as governor. And that's probably the most significant thing that we see in this. Over the years, he's tended to be between 47 and 53%, despite everything with the recalls and so forth. But then last month, there was a PPP poll that showed it dropped to 43%. And the question was that an anomaly, or was this really the case? And this seems to point to the fact that voters are not happy with Walker, spending much of his time running for president instead of being here.
Right. I mean, all of this is happening amid, the Joint Finance Committee just the other day stripped out a lot of, several of the governor's proposals from the budget. There's people wondering, is he leading on the arena when it was Scott Fitzgerald who came up with the new plan? James, do you think there's Walker's travels and these are taking a toll on his, sort of keeping tabs on what's happening here at home?
Of course it is. I mean, do we have a governor, or do we just have a pretend governor running for president?
We have 2 governors right now. We have
2.
We have Voss and we have Fitzgerald. They're the ones who are deciding what's going on. Right. And you're right. There are 2 types of stories being written these days about Scott Walker. 1, where is he and what is he saying in South Carolina or Iowa? And 2, what proposal in his budget are they stripping out of the budget proposal this week? Those are the 2 types of stories he's getting, neither of which is favorable to him.
And the fact that he's losing to Hillary in the state, that's not surprising to me, and it shouldn't be surprising to anyone. I mean, he has been absent in this state for quite some time. And I think that's telling, especially with a budget right now that people are looking at and say, whoa, all these cuts, man, what's going on? I mean, it shouldn't be surprising to anyone.
So do you think he's going to change direction, start spending more time here?
Why would he? He's running for president. I mean, he's trying to generate as much money as he can. And, you know, but what we just learned with him creating this PAC that was just created for him, I mean, all he's doing is just creating as much money as he can so he can run for president. I mean, it makes sense.
Well, I think he has to do something because he can't look like an absentee governor. So even though he's got a number of speeches lined up, you know, there's got to be some concern with this poll going out, because the message is going to be that people aren't happy with this presidential run here, and it's not going to look good for him if he continues to trail against Hillary Clinton. Now, saying that, Hillary Clinton performed very well against President Obama back in 2007 throughout the year, and then when it really counted, Obama took over and he ends up winning by 17-18%. So this is just a snapshot of where things are today. It's not some sort of prediction about where things are going to be next year.
Let's look at, there was some other numbers in that poll that we didn't show, but, you know, among Republicans, their choice, you know, probably not surprising, Walker 40%, Rand Paul was
Rand Paul's at
next
10%, and then just a scattering of other people. That's probably not surprising.
No.
You know, the previous polls had included Paul Ryan, who Ryan had actually performed better against Clinton than Walker had.
People preferred Ryan versus Walker when we're given this menu of Republicans were asked, well, who do you most want to see run? And they said Paul Ryan.
And Ryan has to be
Walker.
kicking himself for not getting in this race. I mean, out of all the people, he's thinking to himself, why didn't I run?
No. Ryan is thrilled that he's not a part of
Are
this
you
circus.
serious? No, he would want to be in this race right now. If he had it to do all over again, he would be in this race because he would be doing far better than Walker, don't you think?
The problem for Walker is he's an executive, he's an administrator who's running a state. It's easy for Ryan to run for another office while being in Congress, but he has a major position overseeing the budget right now. So first of all, I think Ryan enjoys the job he's doing. We all knew that Walker was he's always looking to the next job. So that's a significant difference between the two.
We should note, I mean, you don't run for president of Wisconsin, so it's more important for him probably where his poll numbers nationally, and he seems to be doing still well in New Hampshire and Iowa.
And
the key
this is
places,
this two-track thing that's been going on for now 2 months, which is he performs extremely well nationally, and he's not doing so well at home. And you know, I don't know how you deal with that, how you end up balancing those two things.
Well, you deal with it the way he's been dealing with it. You continue to run a national campaign and you don't worry about the state. And with the state having as many problems as it's having right now, I mean, he should be called on the carpet for it.
Another number in there, at first blush look at the potential Feingold Ron Johnson rematch from 4.5 years ago. Feingold 54%, Ron Johnson 38%. First, are we going to see this rematch, and what to make of those numbers?
Feingold's going to run. Right now he's taking some time out to go teach, but everybody expects him to run. The other candidates who were thinking about running, Ron Kine, Gwen Moore, Chris Abele, even, they've all backed off. This is going to be a Feingold Johnson race. What these numbers show is that Johnson has not done a great job of advertising himself and getting his name out there over the recent years. He bragged a lot about how much money he raised in the first quarter, $1.3 million, but I hear Republicans internally had hoped the figure would be closer to $3.5 million. So he's got a lot of work to do. The election's very different than the first time he ran against Feingold. When he ran against Feingold, it was a non-presidential year. This year next year will be a presidential year. So the dynamics change, and he's got to do something to get his name out there with the voters.
Okay. Last, quickly before we move to our reader questions, you know, Scott Walker made the pledge or promise, just that he wouldn't, you know, formally enter the race until after the budget is done. Does that help him, hurt him? Does it really matter at this stage, given how he's doing on the presidential level?
I think it's not a bad thing for him. I mean, some people might be saying, you know, he's got to wait until now, May, June, whatever. But he's getting a lot of attention nationally. He doesn't need to get into the race and get the oxygen or the bump that comes with that. Some of these other candidates who are getting in do need that because they've fallen into the second tier of candidates, and you get 2 or 3 days of coverage, and that's very helpful to you. On the other side, you have Hillary Clinton, who's decided to get involved, but that's, I think, mainly to start fundraising, and 2, to start responding to the critics, because as soon as, you know, for the last month, she's been being hit by people from all directions. This allows her to become more aggressive in responding to those individuals.
All right, with the time we have left, we're going to go to some reader questions. These were submitted online, and some are still coming in, so we'll get some of the more recent ones. So we can keep James and Dan here. The first one, this is submitted by John Doe, who's saying, who is paying for all of the Scott Walker travel? He's overseas again, and there are all sorts of problems here he's not paying attention to. Why can't we find out where he is?
This guy apparently was polled by the Marquette poll. And John Doe, man, he's all over the place, isn't he? Some of the stuff is paid for by the state. Some of it is travel. And there was a story just recently on how much his trip to England cost. And some of it's paid for by the campaign. One thing that the state is paying for is the security everywhere he goes. And that's been true throughout the time that he's been in office. So they try to determine what's campaign related and what is state related, and they divide those two things. But it's not an easy division, because while he's been overseas just now, when Hillary Clinton announced she was running, you see Walker tweeting like crazy about her. So was that a state thing that he was involved in, or was it a campaign thing that he was involved in? It looked sort of like it was both. So how do you divvy up the money on that?
Right.
Another question, this one is from Concerned Citizen, who says, has anyone in the media tried to seek comment from Walker regarding the escalating violence in his state's biggest city? James, we haven't heard from Walker. He's in Germany right now.
Right,
I think we're
right.
going to be talking to him later today. But
Well,
what's your take on, should he be in front on that issue? What is it? A local issue, a state issue? What should he be doing?
Well, violence is a state issue, and that's the problem that I have when people see the crime that's taking place here. It's just a Milwaukee problem. Just because you don't hear the gunshots and you don't physically see the violence doesn't mean that you're not a part of the solution. So yeah, the governor should be leading or be a part of the solution. The mayor has called for him. The police chief has said, hey, we need to have a conversation. I mean, he's out of state, so it's kind of hard to find.
And that's the problem that you have when you're running this campaign nationally and trying to run a state locally. With the shooting that happened with the state trooper, it took him several days to actually engage on this. And in this particular case, it's again taking a couple days for him to engage. But his focus isn't here right now.
His focus hasn't been here for quite some time, and that's part of the problem.
All right, I think that's where we're going to leave it today, because we're about at the end of our time. So thank you to our viewers for joining us. If we didn't get to your question, Dan will stick around and try to get some of those answered online. We hope you join us next week. We'll see how many reporters more we can squeeze onto this set in a 30-minute period. And there's a pretty good chance we'll be talking about Scott Walker again. So thank you for joining us. For updates in the meantime on Scott Walker and his presidential campaign, we hope you go to our Walker page, jsonline.com/Scott Walker. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.